I'm Bruce Apar, and you're watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. And now he'll roll the credit. Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog is brought to you by the Penny Saver and our parent company, Chase Media Group. And for that, we always like to thank our CEO, Carla Chase, and my usual co-host, Frank J. Rich, who is not here with us this week, but he will be back very soon. And we also like to remind you that in addition to watching the show on the channel that you are looking at now, you can go to YouTube and search for either Town Link TV or NCN Local TV, and you can see all the past shows on demand, as they say, to watch whenever you like to watch. Our show likes to bring to you guests that are role models in our community and that make positive contributions to our communities and to our culture. And if you know somebody that you'd like to recommend, please don't hesitate to contact me at editor@pennysavercommunity.com. Today, we have a really interesting show. I always enjoy it, especially when we have a musical topic, because ever since I was knee-high to a Victrola, you might say, I've loved music. And so I really look forward to shows where music is the centerpiece, and that certainly is the case on this show, as we welcome Michael Boriskin. Michael, welcome as we reach over. Michael Boriskin, who is the artistic and executive director of Copland House right here in northern Westchester. And Michael, adhering to my policy of never presuming anything in terms of the audience and wanting to make sure we're very clear, let's just talk first about Aaron Copland, who, in a nutshell, was one of the giants of 20th century culture, easily.
He certainly was indeed.
Yeah. He really, for many decades, for really a good portion of the 20th century, embodied American music, not only for this country, but for the world. He was one of our great composers who wrote a number of works which are beyond popular. They've become deeply embedded in America's cultural and social consciousness. Emblematic works like Billy the Kid, Rodeo, Fanfare for the Common Man,
right.
Lincoln Portrait, Appalachian Spring, as well as a wide variety of works that are far less well known, but still form the core of an American concert repertoire. Beyond being an outstanding composer, though, there are two very, very important elements to Copland as an artist and as an individual. One of which is that, from a historical point of view, he was the guy who really helped to define the sense and sound of what we think of as American music. Prior to Copland's work, most work by American composers throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century really sounded European, because indeed we know classical music, concert music, to be derived from European culture. And it was really only when Copland started writing in the 20s, and then especially in the 30s and 40s, that he really helped to set about creating what he called a recognizable American musical idiom. And so we really look to Copland for that sound of American music. The other thing, which really has relevance to what we do at Copland House, is that he was an extraordinarily generous professional colleague. He was a peerless, lifelong advocate of his fellow composers, and really helped to create an infrastructure by which American music, American composers prospered. Again, creating a kind of framework to showcase American music.
And probably, or maybe even inarguably, the most famous name among his proteges, you might say, is Leonard Bernstein, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah, right.
absolutely. Bernstein was somewhat younger than Copland, almost 20 years younger than Copland, but they were mutual champions. Bernstein, as a very young man, really looked to Copland for musical inspiration and was greatly influenced by Copland's musical idiom. And then, of course, Bernstein became very famous at a very young age and had the kind of public platforms as a symphony conductor on which he could champion Copland's music. And so they really, they had a mutually beneficial relationship for decades and were very close friends.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating in terms of their coupling is that, of course, one of the greatest influences musically and in our culture over the last, 60, 70 or more years is West Side Story. The music from West Side Story, which, of course, Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, you might say is in the popular idiom, is their masterwork in terms of its influence. And when I started to get into Aaron Copland's music, subsequent to having West Side Story in our consciousness, you hear the foreshadowing, you might say, of certain passages or themes from West Side Story and Aaron Copland's
Oh, there's no
music.
question about it. I mean, there wouldn't be a West Side Story or so many other Bernstein works or works by many, many other composers without Aaron Copland's work and his influence, which was really, really vast. It's not an exaggeration to say that at least 2 or 3 generations of composers who came after Copland were directly or indirectly influenced by his music.
Right. And we should also point out that if people watching, may be familiar with his name and they're not sure if they're as familiar with some of his music, I mean, Fanfare for the Common Man, the opening bars of that are among the most recognizable, right, music that I'm aware of. I mean, and
Absolutely.
in fact, wasn't it, what was it, PBS that used it for many, many years?
It's been used
as a theme.
Yeah, it's widely used to the point that I've always felt that it's now almost a kind of alternative national anthem.
Yeah,
because we hear it often, as you correctly said. We hear it often at presidential inaugurals, at civic and patriotic events. We hear it at the opening of the Olympics. We hear it at memorial services for things like the World Trade Center. It really serves a civic purpose, if you will. And it's true that there are a large handful of Copland works which have gone beyond their function of being just concert works. They really embody what we like to think of as some of the best qualities of America and its people.
Right, and also one of the interesting aspects of Mr. Copland is his patriotism, and I want to add that patriotism in the purest and best sense of the word, not, unfortunately, as some people today use it, as a political cudgel, but one of his works, of course, is his Lincoln Portrait, where there's actually quotes from Abraham Lincoln embedded in the work itself. But let's also talk, Michael, of course, about Copland House itself, which is in Cortlandt Manor, and going back for a second to the title, Fanfare for a Common Man, really epitomizes his sensibility, doesn't it? And as you were saying before we went on the air, the house itself, the setting of the house, the design of the house, really reflected who Aaron Copland was.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that's also particularly interesting about him, is that he became a truly seminal, iconic figure in the growth and evolution of American music and American culture over the course of the 20th century. But he grew up, he was born to and grew up in really very average circumstances, common, to use the word common,
right,
circumstances. He lived the immigrant experience. He was born here, but his parents were born overseas. He literally grew up over the family store in Brooklyn.
Right.
And he always had those kinds of very, very frugal values.
Right.
As you rightly point out, the cool thing about the house is how it reflects that kind of simplicity, that kind of unpretentiousness. It's a terrific house in a terrific location. It's up on a hill, surrounded by the woods.
In fact, it's called Rock Hill, right?
It's called Rock Hill.
Right.
It's surrounded by woods. It's on a hill. It's a 1940s prairie-style home. It is very comfortable, but really unpretentious,
right,
and unassuming. It's a kind of vaguely mid-century modernist home with
right,
big picture windows and long soffits and vaulted roofs. A lot of Frank Lloyd Wright type of touches.
I was just thinking Frank Lloyd Wright was in my head, yes.
And it grows up naturally in its surroundings. It's
right,
on rock ledge. The
right,
foundation is rock. As it goes up towards the trees, the framing is wood. The big glass windows sort of make the boundary between inside and outside
right,
very, very porous. You feel that you could almost reach out and touch the trees. As one of our resident composers said, the house is almost nested in
right,
the trees,
yes,
which is a wonderful kind of image. And he lived there longer by far than any place else, the last 30 years of his life, from 1960 to 1990. And it is the only residence of his that is still in existence. And
right,
we're thrilled that it happens to be right here in our backyard here
right,
in northern Westchester.
And you've been there. I mean, we said at the beginning, and I want to repeat, you're the artistic and executive director, which I find really interesting, and I have to admire you because I like to talk about the right and left brain, which I refer to as pulp friction.
Yeah.
because because there is
Yes.
the right and left brain can either work in concert, to use an apt analogy, or can be a little in conflict at times.
And mine is completely scrambled at this point.
Well, my point is apparently you really are able to very effectively and successfully balance the two, because you're an administrator of Copland House and you're also a concert pianist, and you're very much involved in giving performances and on the musical end as well. So you've been there from the beginning, is that?
Not quite.
Not quite.
And I wouldn't presume to take credit for the work that was done before I got there by the founders. I am by no means one of the founders, and I have enormous admiration for the folks that really kept Copland's home from being sold.
Right. We should say it's a registered U.S. historic landmark. Yeah.
Well, yes, it's beyond that. It's formally a National Historic Landmark,
right,
which is actually the highest level of historic recognition.
Right.
There are fewer than 2,500 National Historic Landmarks in the country, and this is the only National Historic Landmark in the U.S. that is directly associated with a figure from the concert music world.
Oh, okay.
So it is unique in many ways, and that is certainly one of them. Copland, as I alluded to before, was an extraordinary champion of his fellow composers in American music in general, and he devised in his will a grant-making entity, which is called the Copland Fund for Music. It's a completely separate entity from Copland House, which was intended to help support financially American music projects, recordings, broadcasts, and so forth. And the house was originally going to be sold by the estate, and the proceeds of which were going to be used to endow a few more grants every year. That's a perfectly defensible position for the estate to have taken. What they didn't count on was that some of the locals in our area here in the Peekskill, Cortland area got wind of the fact that the house was
Going to be sold.
going to be sold.
Right.
And they teamed up with the town of Cortland and its supervisor then as now, Linda Puglisi,
Yes.
who really had the vision for what it would mean to the area and more widely to the county, the state, and the country to preserve Aaron Copland's home and somehow put it towards the service of American music. These folks who formed this initial grassroots movement were, your neighbor and mine. I mean, these were average folks. They were not professional musicians, professional artists. They were, history buffs, civic-minded individuals who felt that Copland's home was too important to let go.
Right.
And I have, as I said before, I have enormous admiration for what I can only call the purity and the nobility of that vision.
Yeah.
And all of the pieces came together, and they did indeed convince the estate. The town of Cortland and Linda Puglisi were fully behind this, and they kept the house from being sold. There was a lot of work to be done. It was badly deteriorated inside and out. These folks worked really hard for a few years, and it was only really towards the end of that process, the house was still not operational. This is the mid-1990s, moving to the late 90s, where I had gotten involved. A couple of people who had already been involved came to me, told me about it. I thought it would be really cool to lend whatever kind of expertise I might have had in such things. I certainly didn't think that this was going to be a long-term commitment. I was just happy to be involved in whatever way I could in helping to get Copland's home off the ground as a creative center for American music, and came to around 1998. The house was ready to be opened for programs and open to the public, and this group of folks said, look, we need to start putting together a formal staff. One thing led to another. And here we are, almost 15 years later,
coming up on your 15th anniversary.
Coming up on 15th anniversary, and I am still thrilled to be involved with this. We have accomplished so much and have so much to look forward to.
So you are the original artistic and executive director, is
yes.
that? Yeah, okay. Yeah. And before that, Michael, before this current assignment, you might say, were you a full-time concert pianist?
Yes, and I still am. This is where my brain starts to get scrambled because it's certainly in the arts and maybe more broadly in the nonprofit world, the definition of full-time work tends to be very broad. We tend not to think in terms of 40-hour weeks. But absolutely, I was trained as a pianist. That has always been where where I come from,
Right.
where everything that I do comes from, frankly. But I was never interested in being just a concert pianist.
Okay.
I guess I have my interests range too widely to be thinking about just giving concerts and just playing a small amount of the same music
Right.
month after month,
Right.
year after year. And so when I think back over the work that I've done over the years, I've always been involved in larger kinds of projects that have that have involved bringing people together and
Right.
putting different kinds of people together, bringing different components, different organizations together. And so when Copland House, was a dream for so many of these locals who really managed to get it off the ground. It was really, a logical thing for me to become involved with, because it really brought together so many of my own interests.
Yeah. And you are, again, marrying the two disciplines, you might say, being the chief administrator and as well as a performer yourself. You are, as it were, the front man for music from Copland House, the ensemble, which travels around the world, you said, not just the country, but even, right?
Well, we haven't gotten abroad yet, although some of our broadcasts have gone abroad. We were involved with a big project a number of years ago with NPR and the European Broadcasting Union on a concert of American music, which was broadcast in something like 20 or 30 countries, repeatedly broadcast, actually, which we were very excited about. We are looking at some plans for touring overseas. That is the next logical step. But yeah, from the outset, it was felt that there needed to be a live performing component for what we do at Copland House, because look, you can talk about music as much as you want, ultimately you have to hear it. And so it was really felt that there needed to be a performing ensemble, a really world-class performing ensemble that could make this music come alive. Not only the music of our resident composers, but also 150 years of American music, which is really what our bailiwick is. The great thing about the music from Copland House Ensemble is that it really is the vehicle by which Copland House travels through the region, the state, and across the country. I mean, this spring we've had concerts, or have concerts, in the South, in New England, in the further south, the Deep South, and the Southwest. And we do a number of concerts in various parts of the country. And one of the things that we're looking at as we approach our 15th anniversary and look beyond that is expanded touring. Frankly, we have a lot of interesting projects in the works with presenters all over the country. And here at home in Westchester, we have been very fortunate to team up with Westchester County, with the government, at a really extraordinary property called Mearstead in Mount Kisco, where we are now finishing our 4th season of concerts, which focus exclusively on American music, past and present American music. We think it's about the only concert series in the whole country that exclusively showcases past and present American music. And so that's really become a terrific platform for us to show our work. And it's also been a great vehicle for us to be reaching out and expanding our audience.
And before we actually we have to wrap it up soon. I mean, it's amazing how fast
time flies.
Yeah, but a couple of things, housekeeping before we get into the wrap up stage of the show is that the website is coplandhouse.org.
Yes.
And as I was mentioning, you recently had it redesigned. It's a beautiful website.
Thank you.
Very informative and useful website. I was combining those two words. And people can schedule tours of the house. Right?
Absolutely. The house is open for tours by appointment only, not only to individuals but to groups. We have a lot of school groups that come up to the house. We love for it to be a destination for school groups, especially for younger kids.
Yes.
But we've also had, other senior organizations and community groups come. We want as much as possible to make the house accessible to the public when our composers are not in residence there. So we slip these tours and visits in, which is why it's appointment only.
Right. And one thing, Michael, we haven't had time to get to, but we would love to have you back on the show. There's so much that we can talk about, is how Copland House, one of its primary purposes is nurturing both emerging and established composers, and I know you have a lot of programs at Copland House to support that.
That's
goal.
true.
Right.
The primary physical
Right.
use of the house itself actually is for a what's become a really coveted residency program. These are short-term retreats for a gifted, as you said, emerging mid-career or established composers. They are at the house for anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, where they can focus uninterruptedly on their creative work. It's an all expenses paid residency, which is one of the reasons why we're always having to go out and raise money through the Friends of Copland House.
Right.
Copland House is a nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 organization. And so, if I may, we welcome contributions.
Right. We do have to start to move. But you have a final thoughts, or
no? Just that we encourage people and groups to visit the house, come to our concerts, and stay in touch with us via social media, Facebook, Twitter, and our website.
Right. And as we head out, we're going to see and hear a piece from the ensemble, music from Copland House, where you're the pianist. So what piece are we going to hear?
This is a wonderfully bubbly and exuberant piece by Lucas Foss, who was one of our most formidable composers and conductors and performers. It's a portion of a wonderful piece called Tashi, which I gather means good fortune in Tibetan. And it's the scherzo from Tashi, and it's from a live performance.
Great. And again, thank you, Michael Boriskin of Copland House, for being with us. Thank you for watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. And remember, when Bruce the Blog listens, people talk and play music. Thank you.